My ex divorced me because I wouldn't have kids. Now he's begging to come back after his new family fell apart. My ex-husband divorced me 3 years ago. When we got married, we agreed that we weren't going to have kids. I never wanted them. He said he didn't really want them. So yeah, 4 years into our marriage, he changed his mind, and he chose to divorce me because I wouldn't go back on our agreement and give him children. I'm not really a big believer in divorce. I was ready to be married for the rest of our lives. We had a good marriage, but I guess he didn't love me that much if he picked kids that didn't even exist over me. Right after our divorce, he almost instantly remarried. He got his new wife pregnant right away, and they have 2 kids together. In the 3 years since then, I've finished my higher education and have accepted a high-paying job in healthcare. Life has actually been pretty good for me, and I've gotten to the point where I think I'm ready to start looking to settle down. Yesterday morning, my ex-husband showed up on my doorstep crying. I figured something pretty awful must have happened, so I let him in and got him a drink. He started going on and crying about how awful his life is. He apparently hates his 2 kids. One of them is disabled and maybe autistic, and he has no money due to the kid being so expensive. His wife yells at him all the time. She got fat after having kids and doesn't want to lose the weight she never puts out. He can never go anywhere anymore. He said that he wants a divorce from his new wife and he regrets ever leaving me. He asked if I would take him back and said he learned his lesson. I couldn't help but laugh at him. It was so pitiful. His audacity also kind of astounded me. I told him that with 2 kids to support and his lack of loyalty, he is not a catch. And I definitely won't take him back, and maybe this was karma for divorcing me. He was pissed, called me an asshole, and said he thought I would be more supportive and would at least turn him down nicely. Eita. Update 1. So I didn't really expect my last post to blow up like it did. I'm honestly kind of overwhelmed by the responses. I tried reading through as many comments as I could, but there were just so many, and a lot of them hit a nerve in ways I wasn't prepared for. I guess I should start by saying that, after all the dust settled from his little visit, I kind of went into a spiral. Not the kind where I regret my choices or anything, but just the mental chaos that comes from suddenly having to deal with your past in such an up-close and personal way. It's been 3 years since the divorce, and I really thought I'd moved on from it. I've built a new life for myself, one that's filled with purpose, peace, and a really comfortable routine. But having him show up like that, broken and pitiful, it shook something loose in me that I didn't even realize was still hanging on. Old wounds, I guess. After he left, I sat in my apartment just staring at the door. The whole scene kept replaying in my mind. His tears, his frustration, his self-pity. And I kept thinking about how I used to love this man. I mean, I really loved him. I was willing to spend the rest of my life with him, build a future with him, even without kids, which wasn't a small decision for me either. For a long time, he was my everything, you know? And to see him now, after all these years, like some kind of broken shell of the person I used to know, was weirdly satisfying and tragic all at once. But here's the kicker. After a couple of days of stewing in all of this, I got another knock on my door. This time, it wasn't him. It was his wife. I don't know what I was expecting, but it definitely wasn't this. She looked exhausted, bags under her eyes, messy hair, wearing one of those oversized t-shirts that scream, "I'm doing the bare minimum to survive right now." She didn't even say hello. She just kind of stared at me for a minute like she wasn't sure if she wanted to talk or cry or yell. Finally, she just asked, "Can I come in?" I hesitated. I mean, what was I supposed to say? "Sure, come in. Let's bond over your failing marriage with my ex-husband." But I couldn't just leave her standing there, so I let her in. We sat down, and the silence was thick. I could tell she was struggling to find the words, and honestly, so was I. She was the woman my ex-husband chose over me, the one who gave him the kids he so desperately wanted. And now, here she was, sitting in my living room looking like the world had chewed her up and spit her out. Finally, she broke the silence. "I don't know what he told you," she started, "but I need to set the record straight." And then she launched into her side of the story. Apparently, things between them have been rocky almost since the beginning. She told me that my ex had always been emotionally distant, even before the kids came along. He had this fantasy in his head that having children would somehow fix everything, like they were the missing piece to his perfect life puzzle. But the reality of having two young kids, one of them with special needs, was something he just wasn't prepared for. She said that he started checking out emotionally once the demands of parenting got real, and he'd become more and more withdrawn as time went on. "I know he came to you," she said, her voice cracking. "I know he's been complaining about me, about the kids, about everything, and I just need to know if you're going to take him back." That hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't even considered the possibility that she'd be worried about me getting back with him. From my perspective, it was a complete no-brainer. There was no way in hell I'd take him back, but I guess she didn't know that. And that's when it hit me. She was just as broken as he was, maybe even more so. And suddenly I felt this weird sense of solidarity with her, this woman who was technically supposed to be my replacement. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "I'm not taking him back. Ever." The relief on her face was immediate. She slumped back into the couch, exhaling like she'd been holding her breath for months. Then, without warning, she started crying. Not a gentle, soft cry either. Full-on, body-shaking sobs that made me feel like I was watching a person unravel right in front of me. And all I could think was, this is what he left me for. This is the life he thought was going to make him happy. And now it's falling apart right in front of my eyes. We sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably just a few minutes. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I just let her cry. Eventually, she calmed down enough to talk again. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I feel so trapped. I love my kids, but I feel like I'm drowning. And he just doesn't care." It was in that moment that I realized something. My ex-husband's problems weren't really my concern anymore. He made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. But this woman, his wife, was stuck in a situation that she probably didn't see coming either. And while I didn't exactly owe her anything, I couldn't help but feel for her. She left shortly after that, apologizing for the meltdown and thanking me for listening. As she walked out the door, I couldn't help but wonder what was going to happen next. Was she going to leave him too? Was my ex about to lose his second marriage because of his inability to cope with reality? I don't know. But what I do know is this. I dodged a massive bullet when he left me, and I'm never looking back. Update 2. I honestly thought that would be the end of it. I figured after his wife came over and had her breakdown, they'd either work things out or they'd split up. Either way, I wasn't expecting to hear from either of them again. But, as life has a funny way of doing, things didn't exactly go as planned. About 2 weeks after his wife's visit, I got a message from my ex. Not a phone call, not a knock on the door, just a simple text message. It was a short message. All he said was, "We need to talk." My immediate reaction? Nope, absolutely not. I had already dealt with more of his drama than I ever wanted, and I wasn't about to open that can of worms again. But something about the message lingered with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. I didn't respond right away, but I couldn't stop thinking about it either. I debated with myself for a good hour. On one hand, I didn't owe him anything. He made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. On the other hand, I was curious. What more could he possibly want to say? He had already laid out all his regrets, begged for me to take him back, and then stormed off when I refused. What else could there be? So, against my better judgment, I sent back a simple, "What's up?" I didn't expect a quick response, but my phone buzzed almost immediately. He asked if we could meet in person, and at first I was going to say no. But curiosity got the best of me, and I agreed to meet at a local coffee shop, thinking it would be safer than letting him into my home again. Public space, neutral ground, what could go wrong? When I walked into the cafe, he was already sitting there, looking even worse than the last time I'd seen him. If I thought he was pitiful before, this was a whole new level. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, and his once neatly combed hair was a mess. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes were wrinkled like he'd grabbed them off the floor. As soon as I sat down, he launched into it. No pleasantries, no small talk. Just straight to the point. I'm leaving her. I wasn't shocked. I could see this coming from a mile away. The guy never learned how to deal with hard times. His solution was always to run. So him bailing on his second marriage when things got tough didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was what came next. I don't want to just leave her, though, he continued, his voice low and shaky. I need to make sure I get full custody of the kids. Now, that caught me off guard. Full custody? I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. What the hell are you talking about? Last time you were here, you said you hated being a dad. Now you want to take full custody? He rubbed his hands over his face, groaning. It's not about what I want. It's about what's best for them. I raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. He must have seen the doubt on my face because he quickly added, She's not fit to take care of them. She's falling apart mentally. She's unstable. This was wild to me. I mean, yes, when his wife came to my place, she was clearly overwhelmed and exhausted, but that didn't mean she was unfit to be a mother. If anything, she seemed like she was trying her hardest to keep everything together while my ex just checked out. So what? You're planning on being some superhero dad now? I asked, leaning back in my chair, skeptical as hell. What's really going on? He sighed heavily, looking around the cafe like he was making sure no one was listening. I can't trust her. I found out she's been seeing someone else. And there it was, the real reason. Apparently, his wife had been having an emotional affair, at least that's how he described it, with someone she met through a support group for parents of special needs children. She hadn't crossed any physical boundaries yet, but they'd been texting constantly, and my ex had stumbled across the messages on her phone. He felt betrayed, like history was repeating itself. Only this time, he was the one getting the short end of the stick. I sat there, just listening, as he spiraled into this rant about how she had let him down, how she was neglecting the kids, and how he was the only one who could step up now. But it didn't take a genius to see what was really happening. He wasn't worried about the kids. He was terrified of being left. He was trying to preemptively strike, to protect himself from the humiliation of being the one who got dumped this time. I let him talk for a while longer, but eventually I couldn't hold it in anymore. I leaned forward and looked him dead in the eyes. You're full of it, I said flatly. You don't want those kids full-time. You never did. You're just scared of being alone. The look on his face was priceless. He didn't expect me to call him out like that. He stammered for a minute, trying to come up with a rebuttal, but I wasn't going to let him off the hook. Do you even realize what you're asking for? Full custody? That means you'd be the one responsible for everything. You'd be the one staying up all night with them, taking them to appointments, managing their needs. You think you can handle that? You can't even handle your own life right now. He opened his mouth to argue, but I kept going. This isn't about the kids. This is about you wanting to feel in control again. You left me because I wouldn't give you kids, and now you're trying to weaponize the ones you have. It's pathetic. There was a long, uncomfortable silence after that. He just sat there, staring down at the table, his fingers tapping nervously on the edge of his coffee cup. For a moment, I thought he was going to blow up at me, but instead he just let out a deep sigh. You're right, he muttered. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. That was probably the most honest thing he'd said in years. I've screwed everything up, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. My marriage, my kids, everything. I didn't disagree. I didn't feel the need to rub salt in the wound, though. Instead, I just nodded, letting the weight of his admission hang in the air between us. There was nothing else to say, really. He'd made his choices, and now he was finally starting to understand the consequences. Eventually, I stood up to leave. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of defeat and desperation. What should I do? He asked. I paused for a second before answering. You need to stop running away from your problems. Deal with the mess you've made. You owe it to your kids to at least try and be a decent father. And with that, I walked out of the cafe, leaving him sitting there, drowning in the reality he'd spent years trying to avoid. Update 3. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. I left that cafe feeling like I'd finally closed the door on this chapter of my life. But of course, life had other plans. A few months went by, and things started to settle back into their normal rhythm. I was focused on my job, enjoying my independence, and even started dating again. Nothing serious, just dipping my toes back into the water, so to speak. But just as I was starting to really move on, I got hit with a bombshell I never saw coming. It was a Saturday morning, and I was scrolling through my phone, sipping coffee, when I got a notification from Facebook. I didn't think much of it at first. Just another friend request or event invite, right? Wrong. It was a post from my ex-husband's sister, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. The post was long and emotional, and as I read through it, my stomach dropped. My ex-husband had been in a car accident. A bad one. The details were vague, but from what she wrote, it seemed like he had been driving late at night, probably tired and lost control of his car. He was in critical condition, in a coma, and it didn't look good. I didn't know how to feel. I mean, this was the man I'd once planned to spend my life with. We'd been through so much together, and now he was lying in a hospital bed, maybe not ever waking up. Despite everything, a part of me still cared about him, at least enough to feel a deep sense of sadness for what had happened. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I didn't reach out to his family. I didn't want to insert myself into their grief. But I kept checking for updates, hoping for some news, some sign that he was going to be okay. Then, out of the blue, I got a call from his wife. Her voice was shaky, but she got straight to the point. "I don't know who else to turn to," she said. "The kids, they're asking about him, and I don't know what to say. I'm falling apart." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't exactly her go-to support system, but I could hear the desperation in her voice. She was alone, terrified, and facing the possibility of raising 2 kids on her own, one of whom had special needs. "I'm so sorry," I said, meaning it. "I don't know how I can help, though." "I don't either," she admitted, her voice cracking. "But I'm scared. And I thought, I don't know, maybe you'd want to say goodbye, just in case." That hit me hard. I hadn't even considered the idea of saying goodbye. It felt too final, too heavy. But the reality was, he might not make it. And if I didn't go, I might regret it for the rest of my life. So, I went. Walking into that hospital room was one of the strangest experiences of my life. There he was, hooked up to machines, looking so small and fragile. It was hard to reconcile this image of him with the man I used to know, the one who had broken my heart, the one who had tried to come back into my life with so much arrogance and regret. His wife was there too, sitting by his bedside, holding his hand. She looked up at me when I walked in, and for a moment I thought she might tell me to leave. But instead, she just nodded, her eyes filled with tears. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at him. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. Part of me was angry at him for all the pain he'd caused, for the mess he'd made of his life. But another part of me felt an overwhelming sense of sadness. Not for what we lost, but for the person he could have been. I didn't say goodbye. I just stood there, quietly, letting the weight of everything settle over me. And then, after what felt like hours, I turned and left, knowing that no matter what happened next, I was finally free.